11:34 is the time. If you want to lend £800,000 to Keith, but you contact me because you know that I have Keith's ear, and I put you and Keith in touch and you subsequently lend Keith £800,000, can I be said to have arranged that loan? That one's still hanging. If I tell you that Keith has absolutely no knowledge of my finances, and you can be 100% ding-dang sure of that, but Keith subsequently reveals that he's known for quite a long time just how skint I am, what does that make me? I don't think the jury's still out on that one. I think we can probably answer it. Would you like a little reminder of the dissembling caricature that is your former Prime Minister?
But Richard Sharp is a good and a wise man, but he knows absolutely nothing about my personal finances. I can tell you that for 100% ding-dang sure.
He knows absolutely nothing about my personal finances. I can tell you that for 100% ding-dang sure. He might as well have called it an inverted pyramid of piffle. Let's hear now from the aforementioned Richard Sharp, appearing earlier today before the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee.
Mr. Blythe is a personal friend of mine who I've known for some time. As a result of press reports that he had read in September, he raised with me at that time his concern that his cousin, the Prime Minister, was reported in these press reports to have some difficulties. Mr. Blythe raised with me the fact that he was interested in feeling about whether he should do something to help. He raised that with me at a private dinner at his house.
What? Oh dear! What's amazing about this, and we may hear a little more, is that they don't realise how incredible it sounds to the rest of us. I'm pretty posh. Or I can pass for posh. I went to a posh school. I knock about with some posh people. But the idea that these dinner parties, these cosy little chats, this is my cousin, £800,000, old friend of mine, worked in banking, chairman of the BBC. The idea that they think this is normal, I think, is crucial to understanding how it could happen. Oh, it's all perfectly normal. I went to a dinner party, gave him a PPE contract. What's wrong with that? Local pub. Absolutely normal. Oh, hello, Michelle. Would you like a contract? They just think it's normal. And, of course, to everybody on the outside, it's utterly, utterly shocking. Adam Bienkov, the political editor for Byline Times, has been following proceedings at this select committee. Do you go to dinner parties like this, Adam?
Well, I wish I did. My finances might be in a lot better shape, but no, it's quite remarkable, really. He's been speaking to the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee this morning, insisting that everything was above board. And he was merely trying to ensure proprietary and good governance was followed at all times. But I don't really think that stacks up with the evidence of what we've seen so far, which is that he was personally involved in helping to arrange this huge loan for the Prime Minister, also involved with informing the head of the Civil Service about it. Yeah. And none of this was declared at the time, and it was not, crucially, declared to the committee itself when he previously appeared in front of them.
And that is, as you say, that is the crucial bit, because as John Nicholson has pointed out in questioning Sharp, he said, what do you think may have swung your successful application to be BBC chairman over your previously failed application for a non-executive role at the BBC?
Absolutely. And this, as you say, this was all taking place at the time where he was being considered for this very senior position at the BBC, and he informed Johnson, as he acknowledged today, at the time about his involvement, and asked him about arranging that huge loan, which, as you say, was completely undeclared. So far from being sort of the definition of proprietary, it's actually the sort of definition of cronyism, really. You have a sort of senior figure here who has previously donated £400,000 to the Conservative Party, Richard Sharp. You had senior civil servants, you had the Prime Minister, all of this going on behind the scenes. At no point does anyone feel the need to declare this publicly, even at the point where he gets this huge job at the BBC, which is ultimately decided by the Prime Minister himself.
A couple of my texts, Russell points out that a broker, which is loosely speaking what we could describe Richard Sharp as in this context, would ordinarily require a fee for introducing you to a fund provider. And the suggestion is, of course, that the fee in this case was the chairmanship of the BBC. That's the suggestion, the allegation. Do we know what he was doing in Downing Street in the first place?
Well, this is the other. I mean, this is why it also comes back to cronyism. He's not just a donor to the Conservative Party; he's also a former advisor to Boris Johnson when he was mayor of London. And at the time when this was taking place, he was an advisor to the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in the Treasury. So it's a very sort of close-knit, cosy world where these things are arranged at private dinner parties and back offices amongst donors and civil servants, and nobody at any point felt the need to tell the rest of us about
it. That's the crucial point, because the Select Committee are looking for an absence of fear or favour. They're looking for an open and fair process by which Richard Sharp got the job after Boris Johnson failed to insert Charles Moore into the chairmanship of the BBC, his former editor of the Daily Telegraph. Another complete coincidence, I think. So let's go through what we know. So Richard Sharp was working in Downing Street in a sort of unspecified advisory role.
It was a volunteer advisory role to do with the pandemic, yes.
Right. And he popped in to see the Prime Minister and mentioned he quite liked the idea of being chairman of the BBC.
So he was on the consideration. Charles Moore was the first choice at the time, but was then ruled out, and he was then under consideration for that position, and met with Johnson about that. Around the same time, he was also contacted by Sam Blythe.
You're running ahead of us. Don't run ahead of us. Okay. So this followed his previous failed application for a non-executive role at the BBC.
Yes,
so now his interest in the chairmanship had been established with Boris Johnson. At which point, as if by magic, completely out of the blue, Boris Johnson's long-lost cousin and former colleague of Richard Sharp gets in touch, not with Boris Johnson, his long-lost cousin to whom he wants to lend a ton of money, but randomly with his old mate Richard Sharp to suggest that he could lend Boris Johnson a ton of money.
Yes, that's the curious point there, which was also raised in the committee debate. Why, if this is a family member, somebody close to Johnson, why did he not go straight to Johnson himself? Why would there needed to be this go-between? I think that's a very important unanswered question in this whole...
Did he try to answer it, Adam?
Not really. I mean, he said that he was close friends with Sam Blythe, and that he described it as a after-dinner party comment.
Right.
Which I don't think really encapsulates exactly the sort of depth and involvement that Sharp had in this, which, as I say, involved him speaking not just to Boris Johnson about it after Blythe came to him, but also to the head of the civil service about it, Simon Case. And again, we only know about this later because it was revealed by journalists further down the line.
Yeah.
I mean, and you may think at this point, well, surely there has to be some consequences for this obvious stark conflict of interest.
Yes.
And nobody being informed about it. But Richard Sharp today insisting that he's done nothing wrong and he's fully qualified for the job that he got at the time that he was arranging this loan, and he had no intention of standing down.
The shaggification continues. Can the committee call Sam Blythe? He's not a British citizen, is he?
No, I mean, they probably can't compel him to
right.
But yes, he's a Canadian multi-billionaire. Yes.
And can they sanction Richard Sharp in any way? Can they hand down a sort of thing saying, if we'd known this at the time, we never would have approved your appointment? Or
They can certainly publicly criticise him, but I don't think they have any sort of control over his status. Yeah.
And final question, which you probably don't know the answer to, but I'll ask you anyway. Most of the reporting casts Sam Blythe as the guarantor of an £800,000 loan. That's different from lender, is it, or not, or what? I'm pushing you out of your comfort zone here, Adam, a bit, I think.
I wouldn't get too much into
We go to the wrong dinner parties. If we went to the right dinner parties, we'd know the answer to that question. We'd know the flipping lender and the guarantor. We'd have them coming out of our contact book.
That's the point, isn't it? I mean, these are questions that were ultimately, these are not questions that most of us would ever have to deal with. And these huge amounts of money, these are something that the Prime Minister should have been aware wasn't above board, and certainly the head of the civil service should have been aware, and somebody being considered for the head of the BBC should have been aware that these things weren't above board and should have acted accordingly. They did not do so, and it didn't seem like there's any consequences for that.
Well, here we go. So, I mean, there are two things to draw from this story. Richard Sharp's appointment is deeply suspect, and you and I don't get invited to the right dinner parties.
Maybe after this conversation we will be.
Plus ça change. Adam Bienkov, political editor over at Byline Times, one of the more reliable outlets if you're seeking to navigate your way through the swamp that British politics